At 2 a.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, February 28, 2026, 4 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers took off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. They flew in absolute radio silence. No broadcast, no announcement, no warning. They crossed the Atlantic, refueled twice in the air over undisclosed positions, and continued east. 30 hours after wheels up, they were over Iran. What happened next ended 47 years of the Islamic Republic in broad daylight. In 30 seconds, I will show you something that almost no analyst predicted was possible. Not the strikes themselves, but what the strikes accomplished in the first 60 minutes that changed everything. Stay with me. Here is the timeline as it actually unfolded. At approximately 10 a.m. Tehran time on February 28, 2026, Israel launched the opening wave of Operation Roaring Lion. This was not a warning shot. This was not a demonstration of force. According to IDF spokesperson Brigadier General Effie Dufresne, speaking on Sunday morning, the Air Force eliminated approximately 40 key Iranian military commanders within 1 minute of that first wave. 1 minute, 40 commanders. Among them, according to confirmed reporting by CNN, The Times of Israel, and Iran International, Major General Mohammad Bagheri, Chief of Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces, General Hossein Salami, Commander-in-Chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Ali Shamkhani, Head of the Supreme National Security Council, and 4 senior Iranian intelligence commanders, including Javad Pourhassan, Head of Foreign Operations. All gone before 8 a.m. in Washington, before most Americans had finished their first cup of coffee. But here's what no one connected until hours later. Those 40 commanders were not killed randomly. They were killed at a meeting, a single meeting of Iran's Defense Council. According to reporting by AP News citing 4 Israeli security officials, Israeli intelligence had tracked the movement of Iran's senior military leadership to a secured compound in Tehran. The compound was considered hardened. It was considered safe. The decision to convene there at that hour was itself a security protocol, dispersing leadership during a period of elevated tension. But the Mossad had penetrated that protocol. They knew the meeting was happening. They knew who would be there. And they had coordinates before the first plane crossed Iranian airspace. What appeared to be Iran's greatest defensive strength, dispersing leadership, had become the mechanism that brought 40 of them into the same room at the same time. That is the kind of intelligence failure that does not happen by accident. It happens when a system has been infiltrated so deeply for so long that it cannot trust its own security procedures anymore. Now, while Israel executed the decapitation strike in Tehran, something else was already moving in the Arabian Sea. USS Abraham Lincoln, the San Diego-based aircraft carrier, and its strike group had been positioned in the region since early February. According to the San Diego Union Tribune reporting from February 28th, Lincoln played a leading role in the joint attack's first wave, launching air wings against Iranian naval assets, ballistic missile storage facilities, and coastal defense installations. Her F-35C and FA-18 squadrons coordinated directly with Israeli F-35s coming from the northwest. 2 theaters of fire, 1 coordinated grid, and then came the B-2s. According to the Aviationist, which first confirmed this through open-source ATC radio tracking on March 1st, 4 B-2A Spirit stealth bombers flew a round-trip mission from Whiteman Air Force Base to Iran. According to a U.S. defense official cited by the Times of Israel, those 4 aircraft dropped dozens of 2,000-pound bombs on underground ballistic missile storage sites across Iran. These were the same aircraft that had carried out Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025, the strike that damaged Fordow and Natanz. But this time, the mission was not just nuclear, it was total. Nuclear sites, missile production facilities, IRGC headquarters, naval installations, government ministries. According to the Understanding War Institute's evening special report from February 28th, the combined U.S.-Israeli force conducted nearly 900 strikes on Iranian targets in that single day. 900. To put that number in context, the entire first day of the Gulf War in 1991 involved approximately 1,000 sorties across all coalition aircraft over 12 hours. Operation Epic Fury approached that scale with a fraction of the aircraft, in a fraction of the time, with precision that 1991 could not have imagined. The Center for Strategic and International Studies released its assessment within hours. According to the CSIS analysis published February 28th, the strikes decimated Iran's enrichment facilities at Fordow and Natanz, and destroyed Iran's metallurgy facilities at Isfahan. Fordow, the facility buried 90 meters under a mountain that analysts had concluded was nearly impenetrable, was struck by the B-2s carrying GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators and sequential programming. The same weapon, the same target, programmed to arrive at different angles, different depths, different millisecond delays, mountain killers, as the reference mission planners called them internally. The Pentagon's initial assessment confirmed, according to CSIS reporting, sustained and extremely severe damage and destruction to the nuclear sites. But here is what makes this moment historically unprecedented. And this is what I want you to understand. Not the explosions, not the bombs, not the aircraft, but what happened at approximately 3 p.m. Tehran time on February 28th. Iranian state media fell silent, not briefly, not for a few minutes, for hours. The Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting, which had operated continuously through the June 2025 strikes, through the Mahsa Amini protests, through every crisis since 1979, went dark. According to The Guardian citing Iranian sources, communication services across Tehran were disrupted. Satellite imagery, reviewed by CSIs and published within hours, showed that Khamenei's secure compound had sustained direct hits. The compound, where Iran's supreme leader had lived and worked for 3 decades, was heavily damaged. And the 86-year-old man who had ruled Iran since 1989, who had ordered the suppression of every protest, the funding of every proxy, the construction of every centrifuge, was not heard from again. At approximately 6 p.m. Tehran time on February 28th, Iranian state media confirmed what Israeli security officials had already told 4 news organizations. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was dead. AP News confirmed it. CNN confirmed it. The Guardian confirmed it. NPR confirmed it. The man who had held the Islamic Republic together through wars, sanctions, assassinations, uprisings, and international isolation, the architect of the Axis of Resistance, had been killed in an Israeli airstrike on his own compound, in his own city, on an otherwise ordinary Saturday afternoon. 47 years and 47 minutes. That is how long it took. Now let me tell you why this was possible on this day and not on any other day in the last 4 decades. Because understanding that answer tells you something far more important than the strikes themselves. It tells you where this goes next. In June 2025, the United States and Israel conducted Operation Midnight Hammer, 7 B-2 bombers, 14 GBU-57 bombs. Fordo and Natanz struck. The world held its breath. But the regime did not fall. Khamenei gave a speech 48 hours later. IRGC commanders appeared on state television. The message was clear: we are still here. And Iran did what Iran always does: it adapted. It began construction of new facilities, Pickaxe Mountain, deeper, harder targets. It dispersed its leadership protocols. It increased redundancy in command structures. What changed between June 2025 and February 28, 2026? According to Le Monde's analysis published March 1st, the decisive shift was intelligence penetration. The impressive Israeli operations, Le Monde reported, were made possible by what one Western intelligence official described as unprecedented access to the inner workings of the Iranian security apparatus. The same penetration that allowed 40 commanders to be killed in 1 minute was the product of months of pre-positioning human intelligence assets inside Iran's most sensitive institutional layers. The Mossad had apparently learned the lesson of Fordo. Hardened physical infrastructure could not be the only target. The people who operate that infrastructure had to be removed simultaneously, or the infrastructure would simply be rebuilt. This is the doctrine that has no name in public documents, but has been visible in Israeli operations for over a decade. Kill the network, not just the nodes. And on February 28th, they killed the network at scale. Before we go further, let me tell you something about those B-2 missions that the coverage has almost entirely missed. Because the underground ballistic missile storage sites that were targeted on the night of February 28th were not just military hardware. They were the entire deterrence architecture of the Islamic Republic. According to the Understanding War Institute special report from February 28th, Iran had invested over a decade and an estimated $40 billion building what military analysts call the underground missile city, a network of hardened subterranean launch facilities and storage bunkers spread across western and central Iran, specifically designed to survive American conventional strikes. The B-2s flying from Missouri were not targeting missiles that were visible from satellites. They were targeting tunnels bored through mountains to depths between 80 and 120 meters. According to the aviationists' technical reporting, the 4 B-2s dropped dozens of 2,000-pound bombs, joint direct attack munitions, on these sites in sequence patterns designed to collapse tunnel networks rather than simply damage surface access points. This is distinct from the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator approach, used in June 2025 against Fordo. 2,000-pound JDAMs used in mass sequence to fracture and collapse a tunnel system require fewer aircraft and less logistics than the 30,000-pound bunker busters, but require far more precise sequencing of impact coordinates to achieve structural collapse rather than surface cratering. The reason this matters is that Iran's ballistic missiles, the Shahab-3, the Ahmad, the Khorramshahr-4, were the only weapon system that could realistically threaten U.S. carrier groups at range. With the underground missile cities struck, with production facilities at Isfahan destroyed, with the IRGC Missile Corps command structure decapitated alongside the 40 commanders killed in the opening minute, Iran's ability to execute a coordinated conventional ballistic missile campaign against U.S. naval assets has been significantly degraded. The barrages that struck UAE and Israel on February 28th and March 1st were launched from surviving mobile platforms, truck-mounted launchers that dispersed before the strikes. They are real. They are deadly. But they are not the coordinated mass saturation attack that Iran had spent decades building toward. But here is the complication. And this is where the story becomes genuinely dangerous in ways that the first wave of coverage has not fully examined. Iran did not collapse. Iran responded. Within hours of the initial strikes, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or what remained of its command structure, began executing pre-positioned retaliation protocols. According to the New York Times live updates from March 1st, and confirmed by Al Jazeera's tracking data, Iran launched a massive retaliatory barrage targeting U.S. military installations and allied states across the Gulf region. The scale of that retaliation was staggering. According to UAE Defense Ministry, figures cited by The Guardian, the UAE alone detected 165 ballistic missiles, 2 cruise missiles, and 541 Iranian drones launched since the strikes began. 165 ballistic missiles. At a single country, UAE air defenses destroyed 152 of those 165 ballistic missiles. 13 landed in the sea. Both cruise missiles were intercepted. But 541 drones is a different calculation entirely. According to CNN reporting from February 28th, 3 people were killed and 58 injured across the United Arab Emirates. Dubai, one of the most fortified commercial cities on Earth, was struck. Smoke rose over the skyline. Hotels were damaged. Airports activated emergency protocols. In Kuwait, according to Fortune reporting from March 1st, 1 person was killed and 20 wounded in separate Iranian retaliatory strikes. In Bahrain, where the United States Fifth Fleet maintains its headquarters at Naval Support Activity Bahrain, Iranian missiles targeted American installations directly. In Israel itself, according to The Guardian's live coverage, approximately 40 buildings were damaged by Iranian ballistic missile strikes, with 2 people killed and dozens wounded. The 3 American service members killed in Operation Epic Fury, confirmed by U.S. Central Command in a statement cited by Fox News, the Military Times, Reuters, and NBC News, represent the first American combat deaths in this operation. 3 service members killed in action, 5 seriously wounded. Additional personnel with minor injuries, their names had not yet been released as of Sunday morning, but their deaths mark a threshold that changes the political calculus of everything that follows. Now let us address the single most important question of this moment, a question that analysts at CFR, the Stimson Center, the Atlantic Council, and Al Jazeera have all been trying to answer in the last 12 hours. The question is this: does killing Khamenei end the Islamic Republic, or does it harden it? According to CNBC's analysis published March 1st, 3 primary trajectories are now possible, citing CFR reporting. The first is regime continuity. The existing system absorbs the shock, names a new supreme leader, and continues. The second is military takeover. The IRGC, which has spent 40 years building parallel power structures, uses the leadership vacuum to consolidate direct control of the state. The third is regime collapse. The combination of military decapitation, nuclear program destruction, economic devastation, and 40 years of accumulated public resentment produces a cascading internal breakdown that no interim leadership can manage. The successor process is already underway. According to Radio Free Europe reporting from March 1st, Iran's constitution mandates an interim leadership council when a supreme leader dies. That council consists of 3 members: the sitting president, the head of the judiciary, and a cleric from the Guardian Council. President Masoud Pezeshkian, who, in February 2026, had apologized publicly for the regime's treatment of protest movements, is now on that interim council. Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei, the judiciary chief, is the second member. And Ayatollah Alireza Arafi, a senior cleric close to the conservative establishment, was named as the 3rd member, according to Radio Free Europe, confirmed by Al Jazeera on March 1st. But here's what makes this interim council structurally fragile in ways that 3 council members cannot overcome. According to Politico's analysis from February 28th, Khamenei's death leaves no obvious successor. For years, former President Ibrahim Raisi had been considered the most likely candidate to follow Khamenei, but Raisi died in a helicopter crash in May 2024. The figure who had been considered the backup choice, Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader's son, has no formal political position, no clerical rank sufficient for the role, and no public mandate of any kind. According to the New York Times obituary published February 28th, Khamenei spent his final years deliberately preventing any single successor from consolidating enough power to challenge his authority. The result is that his death creates a vacuum not just at the top, but through the entire legitimacy structure of the system he built. Meanwhile, according to Trump's statement released on Truth Social on February 28th, which was quoted by WGBH and NPR, the United States launched what Trump called major combat operations against Iran. with a direct video message to the Iranian people. According to CSIS reporting, that 8-minute-long video concluded with a direct statement from Trump. Quote, "The hour of your freedom is at hand. This is not the language of a limited military strike. This is the stated intention of a regime change operation. And that framing carries consequences that will outlast the bombs by years. The IRGC knows this. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps has spent 40 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Not a military defeat, but a political decapitation that attempts to use military shock to trigger popular revolt. Their counter-doctrine is equally prepared. According to Al Jazeera's analysis from March 1st, the IRGC's pre-positioned assets across the region, proxy forces in Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, remain operational. Hezbollah has not been struck. The Houthis have not been struck. Iraqi militia groups affiliated with the IRGC have not been struck. These networks were the instruments of Iranian power projection for 40 years. They exist independently of the command structures in Tehran, and they are now under no orders to stand down. The IRGC claimed on Sunday, according to the Times of Israel and Al Arabiya, that it had struck USS Abraham Lincoln with 4 ballistic missiles. U.S. Central Command disputed this claim immediately and forcefully. According to Hindustan Times, citing CENTCOM's statement, the ballistic missiles did not even touch USS Abraham Lincoln. The carrier was not hit. The claim was false, CENTCOM said. But the claim itself tells you something important about the information war that is now running parallel to the physical war. Iran's surviving command structure is managing a domestic narrative simultaneously with a military one. The regime that no longer has its supreme leader still has a propaganda apparatus, and that apparatus is working to convince its own population and the region that it is not broken. Which brings us to the question that no one in Washington, Tel Aviv, or any capital has yet answered cleanly. 47 years ago, the Shah of Iran fled his country with the full backing of the United States military, the full weight of American sanctions against his enemies, and a security apparatus that had been built over decades to protect him. He was gone in less than a year from the moment protests began. The Islamic Republic that replaced him was not planned by Washington. It was not managed by any outside power. It emerged from within Iranian society according to its own logic and its own leadership, and it lasted 47 years. The question in the ruins of Tehran tonight is not whether Khamenei is dead. He is. The question is, what fills the space he leaves? According to the New York Times analysis published March 1st, written by their senior Middle East correspondent, Iran's regime may yet survive. Its slain military commanders will be replaced. Its governing system, created over decades, has redundancy built into every layer. The IRGC is not an army. It is a state within a state, controlling businesses, universities, media, mosques, and armed militias simultaneously. Killing 40 commanders, however consequential, does not dissolve an institution that has its claws in 60% of the Iranian economy, according to Klingendale Institute estimates. The Times analysis concluded, a governing system created over decades cannot be dismantled in days, but the Stimson Center's analysis, published March 1st, offered a different reading. According to Stimson Center senior fellow writing from Washington this morning, the reported death of Ali Khamenei provides Iran with an opportunity, or an obligation, to recalibrate. The combination of a destroyed nuclear program, decapitated military leadership, and an economy that has been in effective collapse for years means the cost-benefit calculation for continuing the Islamic Republic in its current form may no longer add up for the people who would have to pay those costs. The IRGC generals who survived February 28th are now making that calculation in real time. Here's the data point that sits beneath everything else. According to the NPR report, citing Iran's state media, one of the strikes hit a girls' primary school in Manab, in southern Iran's Hormozgan province. The BBC confirmed at least 148 dead at that school. This is the figure that will define the international response to Operation Epic Fury in ways that military assessments cannot fully account for. The United States and Israel said they were not aware of the school strike. The IDF said it was not aware. The Pentagon said it was looking into reports of the incident, but 148 children are dead. And, in the court of international opinion, the question of awareness does not address the reality of consequence. The UN Security Council called an emergency session. According to NPR reporting from February 28th on global reactions, Russia and China condemned the strikes, with Oman calling the attacks a violation of international law. The European Union's foreign ministers were in emergency talks by Sunday morning, according to Euronews. Italy said Iran's intransigence had provoked the attack. France urged restraint. Germany called for diplomatic paths. But the diplomatic moment is already past the point where urging restraint changes what is happening. Now, let me tell you what the next 72 hours look like based on what analysts are currently assessing. And this is the part that the news coverage is not yet connecting. Iran's Interim Leadership Council has zero military experience among its 3 members. Pezeshkian is a cardiac surgeon who won the presidency in July 2024 on a reform platform and spent his first year being blocked at every turn by the IRGC. Mohseni Ejei is a jurist. Arfi is a seminary cleric. None of them command the IRGC. None of them have the authority to order it to stand down. And the IRGC, whose leadership was partially decapitated but not destroyed on February 28th, has its own chain of command, its own resources, and 40 years of institutional memory that tells it what to do when the political leadership above it is gone. Expand, not contract. According to Aviation Week reporting from Day 2, March 1st, Israel struck Tehran again after the killing of Khamenei. The IDF said many targets remain. Operation Epic Fury has entered its second day with no ceasefire, no diplomatic channel open, and no mechanism by which the surviving elements of the Iranian state can signal surrender even if they wanted to. Because the institution that would have to signal surrender, the IRGC, has no incentive to do so. Surrender means dissolution, and institutions do not voluntarily dissolve. The B-2 bombers that flew 30 hours from Missouri and back are now being refueled. Their weapons bays can be reloaded. The USS Abraham Lincoln is still on station. The question is no longer whether the strikes happened. They happened. The question is whether the United States and Israel have a plan for what comes after, and whether that plan accounts for the difference between destroying a regime's physical infrastructure and replacing the system of governance that infrastructure supported. In 1979, the Shah's physical infrastructure was intact. His palaces were standing. His air force was grounded only because his pilots refused to fly for him. The system collapsed, not because the buildings were destroyed, but because the idea that held those buildings together stopped being believable to the people who were supposed to defend them. What is happening in Iran right now is the mirror image of that moment. A physical infrastructure being destroyed while the underlying idea of the Islamic Republic remains alive in the institutions that carry it forward, including institutions that now have less leadership oversight than at any point in 47 years. According to Al Jazeera's analysis from March 1st, the U.S. is betting on swift regime collapse. Analysts warn the power vacuum could birth a more aggressive leadership. That is the sentence that should be read very slowly. A more aggressive leadership. An IRGC that has direct control of a state, without a supreme leader above it to constrain it, without political accountability to any civilian institution, managing an active war on two fronts. That is not a defeated Iran. That is a militarized Iran with nothing left to lose. There is one more data point that needs to be placed on the table before we talk about what comes next. And it is the number that explains why February 28th was always going to be a turning point, regardless of whether the United States or Israel chose to act. According to Iran's own statistical center data from December 2025, official inflation inside Iran stood at 42%. Food price inflation stood at 72% year on year. The real inflation rate, according to Stimson Center analysis published January 5, 2026, was estimated at 75% when black market currency rates were factored in. The Iranian rial had reached 1.5 million to the dollar in January 2026, a level that meant the minimum wage of 12 to 15 million tomans monthly was functionally insufficient to buy basic food for a family for a week. This is the internal condition of the country that was struck on February 28th, not a prosperous state defending its sovereignty. A population that had already been suffering for years under an economic system that the IRGC controlled to the benefit of a narrow class, while ordinary Iranians absorbed the cost of proxy wars, sanctions, and mismanagement simultaneously. According to the Klingendale Institute's documented analysis, the IRGC controls over 50% of Iran's gross domestic product through its network of companies, foundations, and front organizations. According to the Iranian parliament's own research center, $20 to $25 billion annually is lost to IRGC-affiliated smuggling networks. The people who would now decide Iran's future, the survivors of the Interim Council, the IRGC generals, the clerical establishment, are the same people who built and benefited from that system. The question of whether the Iranian population will rally behind them in the absence of Khamenei is, according to Al Jazeera's March 1st analysis, genuinely open for the first time in a generation. The 900 strikes of February 28, 2026 ended 47 years of the Islamic Republic as Khamenei built it. What they did not end, and cannot end through air power alone, is the question of what replaces it. That question is now being answered in real time in the rubble of Tehran by people whose names have not yet appeared in any news broadcast and whose decisions will determine whether the Middle East of the next 47 years looks more like Germany after 1945 or Lebanon after 1975. The B-2s are on their way back to Missouri. The Abraham Lincoln is still at sea, and Iran, for the first time in 47 years, does not have a supreme leader. Whether that is the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning, no one alive right now knows the answer. But the clock started on February 28th, and it is running